As Bob Woodward said to Rachel Maddow at the end of the last hour, there's so many paths. He said, I've done this for 47 years. I've never seen so many paths. And I've never seen so much as he said, there is a war on the truth. One of the paths that Bob Woodward is talking about is a path to Donald Trump through his former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort. The special prosecutor is exploring that path, and tonight the Washington Post is reporting that former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort is in talks with Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller's office about a possible plea deal. The Washington Post notes that the judge in the case today delayed a scheduled pretrial hearing, but there was no reason given for that delay. The Washington Post notes that President Trump has praised Paul Manafort for not pleading guilty. The Post quotes the president saying prosecutors applied tremendous pressure on him and he refused to make up stories in order to get a deal. The president tweeted that last month. Such respect for a brave man. That is the president's expressed respect for a convicted felon. Bob Woodward's book reveals that President Trump's criminal defense lawyer, John Dowd, decided to quit the Trump defense team not because he believed President Trump was guilty of conspiring with Russians during the presidential campaign or because he believed President Trump was guilty of obstruction of justice, but because Donald Trump simply could not tell the truth. The book reports conversations between the president and his lawyer that could only have come from the president or his lawyer, which means John Dowd appears to be the source of this material in the book, especially since the book includes things that John Dowd thought but never said. John Dowd's own interior dialogue with himself is in this book, and there's only one place to get that. And that actually is what the last line of the book is. The book ends with, in the man and his presidency, Dowd had seen the tragic flaw. In the political back and forth, the evasions, the denials, the tweeting, the obscuring, crying fake news, the indignation, Trump had one overriding problem that Dowd knew but could not bring himself to say to the president, "You're a effing liar." Joining our discussion now, Mimi Rocah, former federal prosecutor, and Jason Johnson, politics editor at TheRoot.com. They are both MSNBC contributors. And Mimi, what do you make of this report of plea negotiations with Paul Manafort tonight? One of the paths, as Bob Woodward would call it.
Well, that would be significant no matter what kind of plea it turns out to be. But it is worth noting that there are two different kinds of pleas that Manafort could take. One would be a plea where in exchange for the plea, he gets some kind of benefit to his sentence. You automatically get credit just for accepting responsibility, and that can help you in your sentence. The other would be a plea where you give information to the government and then you get an even bigger break in your sentence. And right now, as far as I know, we don't know which one, and that could make a huge difference in the sort of path of the investigation and where it goes from here. Obviously, if Manafort did decide to cooperate, that would break open all sorts of new information, I would assume, for Mueller. But even if he doesn't, it would be very significant just if he took a plea. I mean, this is a man who's been fighting these charges tooth and nail. It would, I think, be really something to see him stand up and under oath admit to guilt. And I'm sure that part of what is going on, and there was some reporting of this, is Mueller is, even if he doesn't cooperate, Mueller is going to want Manafort to admit to certain things that have been heavily disputed by the president, I think. And
Jason Johnson, if Paul Manafort does that, if Paul Manafort decides that the truth is that he is guilty and he gets up and admits that he's guilty, he will no longer be considered a brave man by this president of the United States.
No, he will be considered a very dangerous man by this president of the United States, because what does Paul Manafort have to offer? Brilliant insight, some suggestions for suits, maybe some information about Ukrainians? No, he primarily has information to offer about this presidency, about this campaign, about communications, about finances. That's the only thing that Paul Manafort can really come to the table and offer this investigation. So he becomes a very dangerous man for this administration. I think it's important to note that the fact that he's considering these negotiations means he either doesn't believe that a presidential pardon is coming or doesn't believe that a presidential pardon can cover him from all the crimes he is potentially guilty of. And that's the other layer to this that sends a message to everybody else out there. Maybe pardons won't be enough, and working with Mueller might be your safer option.
Mimi, there are so many stunning things in Bob Woodward's book, but one of them is John Dowd's obvious cooperation with Bob Woodward on this book, which seems to be a violation of the attorney-client privilege.
Well, it's a violation if he's revealing, yes, conversations that he had directly with Trump, which it seems like...
Which he is.
He is,
Yeah.
although some of it, as you say, is also his internal dialogue, the things he wished he had said to Trump, and I think that seems to be part of...
But he's in there with phone calls to his client telling Bob Woodward the words in quotation marks that were said on phone calls and other conversations.
There's no question he should not be doing that. It's a violation of the attorney-client privilege and a number of ethical rules. I don't know if he just doesn't care, or it seems like what Dowd wants to do is sort of get his story out there about why it is, that he left the team. It wasn't because, as you said, he thinks he's guilty of collusion, but because he thinks Trump can't tell the truth. And I think the important thing about that statement, which plays such a big part in Woodward's book, is that, Dowd knows that Trump could go in there and lie about the weather. He could lie about things that don't matter, and that's not going to get Trump prosecuted for perjury.
Because it's not a material
Exactly.
fact.
It needs to be material. And so Dowd, by saying you're going to end up in an orange jumpsuit or some version of that, he's really saying that he thinks Trump's going to lie about things that would have a real impact on the investigation. And what that tells me is that he thinks Trump knows things that would have an effect on the investigation. So this whole, claim of Trump's, knows nothing about collusion, no conversations with Russians, that just doesn't ring true with what Dowd is saying here about the backstory.
We're going to have to squeeze in a break here. Mimi Rocah and Jason Johnson. Jason's going to come back. Thank you both for joining us. Coming up, the president who can never find